Hi everybody and welcome to episode 260 of The Art of Procurement. I'm your host, Philip Eidson. And today's podcast, I actually recorded it live from the broadcast studio at SAPAriba Live in Austin, Texas earlier this year. I interviewed Liam Moniz. Liam is Manager of Procurement Systems and Services at Fortescue Metals Group. And Fortescue, they're one of the world's largest metals and mining companies. They're based in Perth, Western Australia. So for context, Fortescue had implemented SAPAriba, but after a couple of years, found that they really wanted to increase the ROI of their investment. So in our conversation, Liam shares what Fortescue did to really re-energize their implementation, re-engage their user population, and then build the foundation to take things to the next level by implementing guided buying. So I started by asking Liam if procurement found him or if he found procurement.
Oh, look, yeah, that's a good question. Procurement found me.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I was intending of moving into, procurement, but I got asked, the business was going through a bit of a transformation in the procurement area.
Yep.
And they asked me to come in and really look at a Reba implementation.
Yep.
And make a decision on whether we're going to proceed with it. The decision was to proceed.
Yeah.
And to really revitalise it and revamp it.
So what were your perceptions of procurement as an outsider before you came into the profession?
Oh, look, to be honest with you, that was 2 years ago, and I didn't know a purchase order from a purchase requisition and an invoice. Didn't understand anything, but I've learned a lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah. So at least it wasn't that you came in with a negative perception and you thought, I've got to come and help fix all these problems that
Not
I saw.
Not at all, no.
Having a perspective outside of procurement, I think, really helps give you a different mindset as to what the art of the possible is. I wonder if you could just explain a little bit as you came into the profession. Sure. Were there some kind of limiting things that you hear from folks within the procurement that maybe you had to help change perceptions or expand the range of thinking? Sure,
absolutely. Look, I came in from an IT background. I've got an IT background, service delivery, so I get technology, right? And I guess it was a fresh set of eyes that I brought to the procurement area. And in that space, what I did was I could see where the two aligned. Yeah. And I could I just saw a tremendous amount of opportunity. So I was able to start leveraging the system and delivering a lot of value very quickly, the quick wins. I think that's where, I was able to start making inroads, learning the business process of procurement, which, blew me away how in-depth it can be. And, it was amazing.
Yeah, we can have our 250-page workbooks on how to do every step of the procurement process.
Believe me, I went through a few of those. It was quite full on.
We try and make it look a little bit more complicated than it really is.
Oh, look, there's definitely a fine art to it, and you start to appreciate that over time.
What was the health of the procurement organisation as you came into the role? You said that there'd already been a decision to invest in procurement technology, in this case, Reba. How was procurement perceived by the rest of the organisation?
Right, that's a good question. So, like I said, it was a transformative time. We had some incredibly skilled people, really focused on their areas of business.
Yeah.
And their particular, category management, your purchasing, your accounts payable, and they were great at what they did, the business process, but they were not using the technology as much as they could. Right. So that's where, when you say what was the health like, if anyone came in, they'd say, these guys know what they're doing. Yeah. But how can we use this technology to really make what they're doing more efficient and get more value for the business? And that's where I came in, and the rest is history.
And I think that a lot of organisations kind of are challenged with the fact that they've invested in procurement tech, and it's a huge investment.
Yes.
And there can be long implementation cycles, but you never really seem to get the full benefit out of it as to what perhaps the promise was, or what you built a business case around. So I think a lot kind of have that same challenge of, okay, we have the technology.
Yes.
How do we actually revitalise the transformation journey?
Sure.
What was, from a technology perspective, when you came on board, what were you using, or what was available to your teams to use?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. Look, I was learning as I was going.
Yeah.
So I was learning the technology.
Yeah.
I was learning the business processes. So for me, it was just having that completely fresh perspective on it, and being able to think, okay, well, what can I do with this technology? and presenting that back to the team, because they didn't really understand the technology too much. There was one of the key things that I raised with the teams was it was different in terms of raising a purchase order and how it was transmitted to a supplier. It was key differences in that,
right? And
people just didn't understand that. So explaining that and why we wanted to use the Reba network to transmit these orders, we, in a year, 250 to 300,000 purchase orders and multiple lines in that. When you start talking about that, and instead of it being an email, being a digital transmitted document to a standard, people start listening and they start going, oh, okay, that really makes sense.
I didn't know that was even possible.
Yeah, and when you're starting to scale, you need this technology there.
So when you looked at what you had access to, did you then start to go back and remap out processes to leverage the technologies? Like, what was the approach to really start leveraging the tech that you already have and for it to generate more value than it was at the time?
Absolutely. Look, first thing we did was we took a really close look at how and who was using the systems. So we have our MRP process in a maintenance area. They were using SAP MM, so it's the ECC system. And we looked at, does it make sense for them to use Reba? And we sat back and we said, no, it doesn't. Because if you look at why you as procurement exist, right, it's the governance, it's compliance, and competitive sourcing. Now, if you've already got that and you built it in through outline agreements and those sorts of things, then why are you forcing them to move on to Reba to do procurement through this other platform when you've already got that functionality happening, right? So then you look at it and you go, okay, so who does need to use Reba?
Where are the gaps?
That's right, so there's projects and these other areas, so you just target those areas and then you get them compliant. You structure the system around them, and that's exactly what we did. So it was strategic. It was looking at which areas of the business did we need to target for utilising Reba, and how do we align the system so it just makes sense for them to use it.
It's interesting. Like I've had experience on the services side, not necessarily the technology, where there's been organisations who have outsourced procurement and started with the wrong categories, so they haven't got the engagement. And it's essentially the same process of actually going where it's needed, as opposed to necessarily just trying to force it on everybody. And then when you start to do that, you get a lot of folks who push back, and then it gets a negative perception of using it, which then spreads across everybody.
No, and that's exactly what, to a certain degree, had happened. It was almost initially there was a mandate. It was everyone's going to use Reba, and I kind of challenged that status quo. I said, "Well, why? Why are we asking them?" And they said, "Oh, but isn't that what we want? We want everyone to use a single system." I said, "Well, horses for courses, really, right? If this makes sense and it's delivering all the value we want, then for the maintenance workers, let's leave that for them to use. For everyone else, there's Reba and it's a great interface. Let's push that."
No, it's an interesting. I think it's important that we actually, you say horses for courses. So important. Sometimes we don't necessarily always take that approach. And because it's more complex, it means you're starting to have to deliver a design solutions that fit specific business outcomes, as opposed to just saying, okay, one size fits all, and we're just going to push everybody on. I mean, from a leadership perspective, was that something that they encouraged, or did it take some convincing to say, you know what, I think we need to take a bit more of a targeted approach?
So I guess I've had a lot of success in my previous role, and that's one of the reasons why I got asked to move across into procurement. And my approach is very customer-centric, so really listening to the customer, understanding what it is they're trying to achieve, what business processes, what are the intricacies of it. And then from there, how does the system align to that? Or what can we do with the system? So it's building the system out to deliver that value. And where it makes sense, you've got to build the right system, or you might need to adapt the process. Sometimes they're not doing, it's not a best practice. So you have to give them that guidance, and it's a bit of give and take. And I enjoy that. That's my passion. So absolutely. Spot on.
How far do you take best practice? Because it's a kind of a philosophical question, I think, that we often look at best practice and say, this is what world class looks like, or this is what best in class looks like. But oftentimes, you really need to design something that works for you and your organization versus looking at what others have done and saying, okay, I want to replicate that.
Absolutely. You know what it is? For me, personally, it's all about maturity. Right? So everyone's a different maturity level. If you want to go to a best practice and you're at a very low maturity level, your chance of success, they're not going to be there. You know, it'd take a huge transformation and a lot of effort. But if you go from where you are to maybe good practice and aim for best practice, you got to go through those stepping stones. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's just like a continuous journey of improvement.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
As you are convincing others within people to engage essentially in the technology that you already have, and perhaps either they didn't know that they had access to certain different capabilities, or they may have already decided, hey, it's not doing what I want it to, and I'm going to give up on it. I'm sure that happens with a lot of folks. You know, how do you convince people to re-engage in the process, want to learn about the technology and to start using it?
Yeah, that's a great question again. So there was a bit of dissent in the ranks because just the previous implementation was a vanilla implementation. The focus was elsewhere. So there was a bit of resistance. I guess what I did was I did a lot of workshops, and I really wanted to understand what were the challenges that people experienced. And again, with my technical ability, I was able to then speak to the folks at Reba and other technical areas and say, how do we overcome these challenges? And effectively put together presentations or demonstrate to these areas of business that, hey, those problems are now gone. And this is how we're going to make it happen for you. And really, when you start speaking in their terms, you start talking about things the way that they understand it, and you show them that the problems are gone. You build those relationships, and then they start using it, and they see, you start getting that traction, and then from there it's just, you can do a lot more, and you keep going on that.
I'm sure that doing the things that you did and revitalizing, the tech and the platform that you have access to needed a lot of support from the provider, and again, in this case, Reba.
Sure.
How did you bring them on board? Because that's sometimes a difficult conversation too.
Sure, yeah. Look, again, because of my technical background, I could understand. I built a really good structure in terms of the internal team, the IT SAP team that would provide additional support, and then the escalation or the additional support we were effectively getting from SAPAriba. So when we decided to go down this path, we kind of branded it. We branded it as a relaunch of Reba, and we said, hey, we really want this to be successful. So what can you do? And this is what we're doing internally. So we've got buy-in from everyone, and they could see that.
And they're motivated as well because they want to get engagement, because ultimately there's a decision further down the line of, is this what makes sense for the long term?
Yes.
Once you get people engaged then and get that stickiness, then to them there's obviously a benefit of doing so.
We also spent a bit of time on our vision. So we said, where do we want to be? Where do we see us? And it was we spent a lot of time making sure that vision was clear, and then articulating that to each group and what their role was going to be. So I think that helped a lot. Because even from SAPAriba, it's going to be an investment for them to give us that support. They wanted to see where it's going to go. And that we had a way of getting there.
And what the benefit and the vision of going and doing it.
That's right, It's not going to be a one-horse race. It's not just them in it and putting all this effort in. And, so that to say we had the internal support and buy-in from senior management to make this.
Sometimes we miss that. As a service provider in my past as well, it's sometimes as a supplier you get beaten up if things don't go exactly according to plan. The reality is that everything that we do is based on a two-way relationship. And what I mean by that is that, the organizations that don't get the success they're looking for are ones that see it as a supplier or a vendor customer relationship. And it's one way, you've got to do all these things.
You got to deliver.
We have the governance, and we're just going to look at you in a QBR, and if you haven't met the governance, then we've got a problem. As opposed to looking at it as a mutual relationship and saying, okay, we know that we're on the hook we may be the buyer, we may be paying the bills, but we have to do a lot internally ourselves to provide the opportunity for you as a service provider or a technology provider to be successful.
Absolutely, no, you're spot on with that. So a lot of implementations, it's just, the onus is on the supplier. They've got to make it a success. They've got to put all this effort in, and there's nothing on the actual buyer side to drive and support the success. So the way I see it is it's a joint effort. Everyone's got to come and play along and do their part, and
And as you're going to the next level now, which something I really like is, you're not just kind of saying, okay, we've revitalized the Reba, we're now getting the engagement that we wanted. Now it's what's next.
Absolutely.
And so you're talking about guided buying And first of all, before I go into guided buying, because I love the guided buying,
Sure.
In terms of what it does, in terms of helping really empower the organisation to make purchasing decisions.
Sure.
Could you share a little bit more about what guided buying is before I start asking a little bit about your approach
Absolutely.
to it?
So we implemented guided buying in 2017, 2018. So early 2018. We started
As an early adopter.
Yeah, as an early adopter. I saw it at Singapore Live and got in contact with the team that was delivering it globally and managed to get on the path somehow.
Yeah.
It was part of our relaunch. And yeah, look, it was a fantastic opportunity. Well, what I did was I organised a lot of sessions or workshops. So I had the actual category team. I had people from the business.
Yeah.
I had Reba. I had my internal support teams in there. And we went through, we did a lot of analysis before. So we looked at what was perfect for guided buying.
Yeah.
And we created these workshops and we brought these people in, brought them together. And sometimes it was the first time an actual end user in the business was talking to someone in a category team.
Right.
And it was amazing because the amount of interaction. So we said, okay, so take us through your general buying pattern.
Yeah.
Tell us how you buy, how you purchase.
Yeah.
So the category team was getting a understanding of that and the appreciation for what the business was doing.
Yeah.
And straight away, you could see them furiously
Isn't
writing
it amazing
down.
what you learn when you just start having those
I know,
conversations?
right?
You start like journey mapping, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, look, we had one session, and the area of business was saying, "Oh, look, we have a catalogue set up, and there's no pictures, and sometimes we're ordering the wrong materials, and it would be great if we just had a picture because." That visual just allows us to choose
what
between.
Helps us know what we want to buy.
Between a liquid or a pill or something like that, right? And the category manager stood up and went, I can organise that for you. And we got that done in a week. So he went out to the supplier and said, hey, can you give us some images and some better descriptions? Got the catalogue back in a week. We uploaded it. Quick win.
Yeah.
And then from there, we put it into guided buying, and we actually guided. So instead of being a huge list of things, we actually guided them through categories,
right?
Which was again amazing for them.
Yeah.
So
the idea of guided buying is basically type in what you want, and then you go through a process which takes you to whether it's in a catalogue.
That's it.
Or if it's a service, so it depends on the way you've configured it. So I guess I'll ask in terms of your configuration.
Sure.
Have you built it around services as well, so that they have the ability to type anything in, and even if it's not in a catalogue, there's then a notification that goes back to the buyer?
Well, we spent a lot of time on that UI because the thing about guided buying, it's all about the UI and user experience, UX, right? So we spent a lot of time on that. We looked at the categories, the key categories that people were going into. Yeah. We made sure there were top level tiles for those. So one of them was IT spend, and with IT spend, that goes to another area of our business. So we don't even use Reba for that; it's centralised. But what we were able to do is, you had the IT tile, you click on it, and from there, it had all the different types of requests you could go through. You click on those requests and it takes you straight into the IT system.
So even if you're not transacting in the platform, it's still the single place for everybody to go to start a requisition.
Didn't matter. So you just go through that, and it directed people to the right area, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And we also, there was a lot of innovation, a lot of great things that the company was doing in all these different areas. So we're able to then surface those little bits of information. So I know in the IT space there was one around printing, so we're doing single sign-on and all these other little innovative things around how much we're saving on ink cartridges or whatever it was. So we had a tile around that, and it was just printing at Fortescue.
Yeah.
You click on it and it had just all this information. People just had it at their fingertips. There was another one around HSE, so it was actually a really amazing one. So I love talking about this one. So we did a whole a survey on the appropriate gloves to use, because each area, each site has different hot works and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's it. So we'd gone out, tested a whole heap of gloves with one of our preferred suppliers, and we'd come out with a set of gloves for each different type of role. And what we were able to do is so Gloves at Fortescue was an initiative. You click on it, it would then take you through and give you all the information, so you could select your role, and then it'd tell you what was the best glove for your role, and then you could just click on a button and order those gloves. So it just took you from PPE to Gloves at Fortescue to ordering it.
And it's based on role type as well, which takes all the kind of decision making out of the process, but also means 3 clicks and you're already figured out what you need to buy.
And we were also able to surface a whole heap of information, like who were the key people in the business to contact if you wanted to, ask them questions on HSE or in procurement around the gloves. So being able to surface and put that information at your staff's fingertips and letting them just get on with the job, that's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, guided buying for me, I think that that's really the future of procurement, because I mean, at least my vision for the future of procurement is that we're focusing on the things strategically that are most important to the business, the most material things, to the competitive advantage essentially of the business. By bringing in guided buying, you're creating the frameworks for which people can buy, but we're not getting stuck in the middle of it.
No.
And when you get stuck in the middle of it, that's where so much negative perception of the procurement organisation comes in, because we're helping people deal with orders that we really shouldn't be getting involved in the first place, and they think that we're being the roadblock for them to go and order the gloves that they need to buy.
Absolutely. And a lot of the time people just don't know that it's the occasional users or a user that's purchasing something that they don't traditionally purchase. They just don't know the supply exists, or that we have this whole agreement and discounted rates with a supplier. So what do? They go out, they go to Google, they'll go and put in a new vendor request, they'll do all this work, when really if you just guided them to the supplier and all this work had already been done, you just connected the two dots, right?
Now, from a configuration, do you have it set up where all your users can go and use guided buying, or do you have it where there's only certain authorised buyers within the organisation?
Sure. So initially what we did was we launched a particular pool of users. So the heavy users, the regular buyers, and we really tested the guided buying system with them, and based on that and their feedback, we then adjusted a few things, modified it, and then relaunched the entire user base and said, go for it.
Just provide access to all. So my final question, I know it's about time to wrap up, and thank you for doing the conversation. I know it's like 4 o'clock in the morning for you. You stepped off a plane, a day ago, and it's middle of the night in Australia. So thanks for sticking with me.
Not a problem.
The last question is really where next. You've gone on the journey. You've really got the building blocks in place with the revitalized Reba platform. You've now built guided buying on top of that.
Sure.
Where are you looking for the next innovation?
Oh look, there's so much. We've got a ton of things coming through, and it's just we're one of those companies that's able to pick up and utilise innovation, and Reba seems to be doing that in quite a big way. So there's spot buy, there's dynamic discounting, there's supplier performance management, and supplier lifecycle performance. So we've got projects in the next 2 to 3 months, and we're effectively deploying all of those products. So
how is that impacting the perception of procurement within the organisation? Is it helping elevate the role of procurement, because you're making, you're enabling more than just cost savings, and you're kind of taking yourself out of you're making it a frictionless buying environment essentially for most of the products and services. Is that impacting how people are working with you as a function?
Yeah, I believe so. So we also we released a sourcing request form, so areas of business could engage procurement, because what we were finding is we're starting to become a trusted advisor. So areas of business were engaging procurement, asking for support on various contracts or procurement type activities, RFIs, RFQs. So it's actually amazing. It's transforming the area. Now we're getting overwhelmed with all these requests, which is fantastic, because that's what we want to do. Absolutely, It's delivering that service.
Well, Liam, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile on our show notes for the podcast, in case any listeners would like to reach out or learn a little bit more about your journey. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com. That's artofprocurement.com. And from Austin, Texas, here at SAPAriba Live, thanks for joining us. And thank you, Liam.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi there, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.